exploring different elements of teaching and learning, particularly associated with what's been happening over the last few months and everybody moving on to online teaching and learning. The main focus for today is a question around how we can make performing arts education work online, and how we can think about teaching and learning, and perhaps more broadly even how we think about the arts during this period and then into the future. I'm going to be hosting it. My name's Robert, and I'm hosting it with my colleague Louise. I'll hand over to you.
Hello. Hi, I'm Louise, and today we're going to have three speakers. We'll have Mohit Kakkar, and we will also have Mohit Kakkar is a lecturer from School of Film TV from the Academy, and we'll have Professor Sharon Choa from Dean of Music from the Academy as well, and also joining us will be Professor Michael Anderson from the University of Sydney. And so what we're going to do today, I think we have three speakers reflecting on the question of how we can make performing arts education work online. And then if you have any questions during the presentations, you can type it on the Q&A box. So you'll see the box in the bottom, and then you can type it there. We will also be monitoring the chat. So if you have other general comments you want to make, you can also enter that into the chat. And then following the reflections, we will be having a panel discussions where we're going to be taking questions from the audience, and we'll also be asking questions as well. So I think now I'm going to pass the mic to Mohit, our first speaker, Mohit.
Thanks, Louise. Just going to share a bit about my experiences and challenges that we had throughout the online learning process. One of the sessions or classes that I had was with 33 students, and engaging 33 students online is a challenge within itself, I believe. Especially for me, if it was a new cohort that I haven't met yet face-to-face, and the first place we're meeting is online, can be a bit sort of a daunting thing because the relationship we haven't even built yet with the students. So how do you then go online on a computer system, which is sort of, it's not very personable in a way, but how do we make that work? So it's sort of incorporating tools and strategies to enable interactions. So during the lockdown, going online presented some challenges. So having some prior knowledge and understanding of applying mixed mode learning, which I've sort of dabbled in before the lockdown period, sort of helped me in the teaching and learning online, in the online space, and it sort of helped streamline the classes since I had the foundation stone which was laid down. Some of the content was already built on our LMS. We use Canvas as our LMS tool for blended learning or online, the online space. So transitioning to online wasn't completely difficult. It was a bit easier considering a lot of my content was on there. And the exercises that were uploaded, the only challenge was to now be facilitating these through Zoom. So how do I then get these to work in a more online environment? I did find using Zoom as a great tool for discussions or breakout rooms especially, and having groups set up so that they can interact in smaller groups, can be a bit more intimate and casual without the teacher being present the whole time. So it gave them a little bit more space to develop and think about ideas or just work together. And then I would check in on them on a regular basis. So I felt that was sort of nice to then be an observer and a listener. And similar to walking around a classroom and just listening to groups talk. So instead I'm online, I'm looking in. Certain problems I kind of ran into would be, say, videos running online. There's technical issues, there could be lags, could be delays on the user end. So on the receiving end, where the student, also depends on internet connections, I think. So that's kind of one of the things that can be an issue when we're dealing with a synchronous style of learning. However, having recorded each session, so I recorded most of my class sessions, which then helped to help students later reflect and review what was done during class time. And it was uploaded to the LMS, which is beneficial for students to watch at a later date and work at their own pace. And certain asynchronous activities that I've used, such as discussions through guided questions on Canvas, quizzes to get feedback on what they know or have understood from the lectures, I think is a great way to inform their knowledge or understand a bit better about the learner. Providing content related to short videos from online sources as well. I find that practical learning, a lot of our classes might be more practical based, so where it requires you to learn equipment, it's a bit difficult to perform these activities online on a more professional equipment scale. Of course, we did try to, at least I did try to employ small scale activities for individual exercises to be completed online, or discussions are online, pre-productions are online, sort of the process is online, but then they're using non-conventional equipment to shoot a short project. I think that also sort of helps gain some knowledge in some respects to maybe the directing or the writing process or the creative just self-learning process. And then using some creative presentation tools that are available online that are free that can be incorporated nicely. And then I think providing feedbacks and comments to their work or their discussions online is definitely something that sort of is required, I believe. That's all I have.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Mohit. So we've got 3 speakers in total. So what we'll do is we'll have a little listen to each of the 3 speakers, and then we'll have a time for us to actually have some discussion. I'd like to hand over to Sharon, who's the Dean of Music at the Academy. She's also an eminent conductor, and I think particularly the programs that she's been working around have been to do with conducting and music in general.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Yes, it has been a really interesting experience, actually, because when the pandemic struck and then we have to put everything online, we thought that it was really doom and gloom, and we could thought that there's no way that we could actually put courses that are practical online. How are we going to teach them to play or to conduct, online without actually seeing them, touching them? But as we actually were forced to do that, I just say at the end, what we found was that both students and teacher, myself, found that it had been an even more interesting and satisfying experience than when we actually were able to meet face to face. I don't know what that says about me, but well, I'll just comment on why that might have been the case. Firstly, I think that if a teacher goes into a classroom, especially if it's a small class, and it is not a very advanced level class in the sense that I was just teaching an elective. It's not a major study or anything like that. So the students were learning, although relatively advanced skills, but still they are not really training to be the next great carry-on, that kind of thing. So what I've found, I'd say my mistake before when I go into a classroom in person was that I would rely quite a lot on my own knowledge, which would be much vaster than the students. I mean, that is obvious, because I have so many more years of experience than they have, so that it's almost not necessary to prepare. I can respond to what they need very spontaneously, which is also good. You know, I don't have any preconceived ideas of what they will come up with. But when everything was online, I found that because, as Mohit said, that the relationship between teacher and student changes, because you're looking at students on the screen and you realize that you really have to engage them in a completely different way, and that you have to be to create an hour of very interesting stuff for them. It's almost like playing games, so that they are at every moment they are engaged. And I'm lucky that I don't have many students in that class, so there are a few very, very good students, 7 I think. And so we all see each other on the screen, and in a way on the screen, when like now when we have all face to face, we can see who are kind of falling asleep, like Robert, or that certain students will, you can actually almost perceive whether they are understanding something or are interested in something or excited about something, or they are actually thinking about dinner or whatever. So and so although we can't really touch each other, actually the engagement at some level is even more sensitive. We can be more sensitive to each other. So I've found that in order to go from week to week, I really have to think hard on how to engage the students. And from that, I have found ways of actually interacting with them, to ask them how they would like to learn better, rather than to how I can teach better in a way. Because we were in it, we were all new to such a format, so we can all be very open to each other and say, we're experimenting. Let's just explore what is going to work for you, and then what is going to work for me. And then the result was that I found that, first of all, I keep in touch with the students much more readily than before, because on Canvas, we can post questions, and then we started posting really fun things on campus to look for this video, that video that excites you, and so on, which we would never have done. We would never do if it was a live class. So in the end, as we went on, we actually developed, in fact, we developed a curriculum, what one might say, that really excited both the students and myself. And they would start asking questions of me, of what is it that excites me? And they become interested also in the teacher in a different way. So all in all, I found that what they also came up with, and the technology, because ultimately they have to conduct, and because most of them, well, they won't have a piano at home or someone to play for them, so they have to conduct in silence, which is one of the most difficult training for a conductor, because the score has to be so detailed in one's head to be able to conduct in silence and successfully. And all of them managed to do that really, really well. And it's a pity that we didn't then have a chance to put them in front of an orchestra to conduct what they learned, because I felt that they learned their scores far, far better than last semester, when we were actually interacting with each other face to face. So that had been my experience, and it was truly a very satisfying experience for me as well as for the students, and they gave me that feedback as well. So that's what I have to share.
Thank you, Sharon. And just a reminder for people who have just joined us, we are, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and then we'll have a panel discussions after all the presentations. So thank you, Sharon. And now we're moving to our third presenter, Professor Michael Anderson from the University of Sydney.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I've got some very fond memories of visiting your institution and being at conferences and meeting colleagues there. So I'm sad not to be there in person, but I suppose that would make this whole conference and this whole discussion a little bit redundant. But anyway, it's great to be here, and thanks very much for having me. I kind of want to take a step back, actually, and try and talk about how we think about learning first and then think about technology. Because I think with the rush that we've seen from COVID, performing arts learning and learning generally has kind of been pushed towards technology at breakneck speed. And in my research over some years, I've noticed that that's been a tendency from governments over the years in higher education and secondary education across the whole spectrum, actually, to kind of create this kind of technological determinism where technology drives the learning rather than learning driving the technology. And now what we've seen with COVID, of course, is kind of invention, or determinism has been the mother of invention, I suppose, where we've had to go to technology and we've had to engage with technology. I want to suggest that we need to take a step back, actually, that we need to start to think about the learning first and the technology second. And what I'm going to say in my next few minutes is really based around a theory of motivation called self-determination theory, which two educational psychologists, Decky and Ryan, came up with, and I can put a reference in for anyone who's interested. And the three things that Decky and Ryan say students need to be motivated to learn, in fact, we all need to be motivated to learn, is autonomy, relatedness, and a feeling of growing competence. We all know what autonomy is. It's the ability to make decisions about one's own learning. So that's the first one, and we can talk about that in a bit more depth. Relatedness, actually, Sharon picked up just a minute ago when she said that her students were coming to her, asking her about, you know, what she liked in terms of repertoire and music, etc., etc. Relatedness is that kind of connection with each other, which I think has a different quality, certainly online, but is certainly something that we can make work online, but we always must make work in an educational setting. And that third idea of competence, how do you become really competent around whatever it is you're doing, whether it be opera, whether it be music, more generally, whether it be drama, performance, dance, whatever it is. So how do we actually manage those three really core ideas of autonomy, relatedness, and competence when we're thinking about our learning? And I'd like to encourage us to, as we take that step back and think about what actually do we want our students to understand, to think about the digital world as paint. What I mean by that is, rather than thinking about the digital sphere and computers as something that is a way of transmitting knowledge, we need to think about how we can, I think, reshape our art forms in some ways around the possibilities, or what's called the affordances of technology. And we know that there are many affordances. we know there are many things we can't do on technology. We can't be in the same room. We can't share a drink. You know, we can't do all sorts of things on technology. We can't do kind of little intimate plays, kind of live, live, not live kind of streamed. There are things we can't do, but I would suggest that we need to kind of almost put those to one side and say, what is it that we can do? What is it, what in our art forms, what are the things that work really well in a digital sphere, and really focus on allowing our students the autonomy to build competence in doing those things. And of course, as we know, our students are often much more competent than we are. The other thing I'd say is that we need to build deep learning as we're doing it. This is the learning disposition wheel that we developed in some work that I'm doing with education. It's based on some research that came out of the US in 2013 about the dispositions that our young people require to kind of survive and thrive. But as you can see, and I'm not going to go into it in depth, I can give you the reference to it if you're interested. We actually are doing more than teaching music or teaching dance or drama. We are actually depending on our learning to be developing these kinds of dispositions for our learners: grit, focus, curiosity, teamwork, influence, make and express meaning. So the cognitive, the intrapersonal, and the interpersonal. If we want to build autonomy, relatedness, and competence, these are the kinds of dispositions that we need to actually make that possible. These are the dispositions that we need throughout our lives, from the very first day of school to the very kind of last breath we breathe, because these are the kinds of dispositions that make learning possible, whether it's in music or dance or drama or whatever it might be. I'm going to give you a quick example from a book that we wrote in 2017 called Drama and Digital Arts Cultures. This was a live in the room experience, but everything we could have done online. It was based around an old English poem called Beowulf. It was from the British Library in the UK, commissioned this work, and we did it in Sydney, Australia. We actually had a group of young people, but they could have been a group of artists, or they could have been whoever, come into the room to think about a retelling of Beowulf and how we might retell it. We used what in our work what we call a coherence maker, which is really a framework for learning in creativity called the Creativity Cascade, and it has 4 phases: noticing, asking why, really why, playing with possibility, and selecting and evaluating. So the first thing our young people did was notice the text of Beowulf, and they drew pictures and they played with large puppets, etc., etc. If we were online, you could do that kind of process online. There is a place for expertise. You may see this fellow here. He's a professor of Old English literature. He came in and talked to the kids about what was happening. But of course, you could do that online as well. But then they were asked to go away in groups and work on this noticing process of noticing things about the performance, noticing things about the Old English poem, noticing the affordances of the different technologies and processes of performances that they could use. The second phase was asking why, really why, which is going in deep and asking deep questions about whatever it is that you're studying, in this case, Beowulf. But it could be asking really why questions about a sonata. It could be asking really why questions about a play. It could be asking really why questions about anything that you're looking at. And really, this is where the critical thinking comes in that we prize so much in the arts. How do you think critically about a context or an idea? And the third area is playing with possibility. So you can see there, again, this was live, but you could do all of these processes pretty much online, where our young people worked with gameplay and what's called machinima, where you mash up bits of gameplay to make videos. They played with possibility around how they would perform this work. They had large puppets that they made that they mashed up with green screen. And in the end, they put this performance together and in a process of selecting and evaluating where they brought all of these things together. So that noticing, asking why, really why, playing with possibility, and selecting and evaluating process was actually the way we structured the learning. And certainly that's this kind of structure that you could apply to any online learning. I think for me, the important thing is that we kind of think of the technology as a way of making things possible in terms of autonomy, relatedness, and competence. How you bring those qualities to the learning and how you make the learning successful will depend on that. Those couple of books there are the books that this kind of work comes from. I'm happy to talk about that more if that's of interest. So I hope that's helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. That was fantastic. We're now going to get into a bit of a discussion, hopefully. And so if anybody has questions, then really do feel free to put them into the chat and we can pick up on those. I'd like to start off, though, something which Michael picked up on, and I think the other speakers have talked about to a certain degree as well, is around this is not necessarily about technology, but it's about thinking about what we're teaching and how we teach. And so I guess I have a fundamental question, which is really about how this period has made us reimagine our curriculum and what we're teaching. And I guess there's the visible, explicit kind of curriculum in terms of how we teach certain skills, but there are also the more sort of hidden curriculum that's there as well. And again, something else which Michael picked up on around motivation of those sort of hidden skills. So I don't know if anybody wants to pick up on that, how it's made you rethink what you're actually teaching fundamentally. Mohit, have you got anything? Would you like to add anything about that?
If somebody else wants to go first, I'm just going to process a little bit.
I'm happy to have a shot at that.
Okay, brilliant.
I think the issue with curriculum as we currently understand it is that it's a bit small, it's a bit limited. And so we've had this kind of tidal wave of kind of experience that our students have had. And often, and I don't know, this mightn't be the case where you are, but certainly in the institution I work in, we haven't, I think, moved quickly enough to shape the curriculum around what's going on in the lives of our students. We've shaped our processes. We've changed our processes. I think we've been very supportive of our students, but we haven't changed what we're teaching because it's kind of feels like it's hermetically sealed. I suppose my argument would be that the curriculum is not just about what's written on the pages of some program. It's also about the life that our students are leading and how we can bring that in through a relatedness kind of approach to help them understand through music or drama or dance or whatever art form that we're in, actually how to understand and interpret what they're doing and perhaps create in response to that. Well, that's just my sense about how curriculum needs to change.
Yeah, Sharon, would you like to come in? I can see you. I think you might need to unmute, sorry. Let me unmute you, Sharon. Yeah, Sharon?
Yes, I often feel very muted, so that's my usual experience. I think it's what Michael has talked about. Of course, put everything in a structure, much more systematically, so that we can really understand the ins and outs of one's a single experience, like what I shared just now. So I think one more thing I want to add is that I found that because this medium, the online medium, is one that young people are more comfortable with. That's how they communicate with each other day in and day out. And therefore, I think that is that's why they are able to be more open and also actually share what they feel they need to learn. So if we come back to your idea of how this might change our curriculum, I think actually we've only just started this process. I mean, I think, Robert, I feel very much in the same way, that we seem to have embarked on a very important journey that the pandemic has forced us to tread on. But we have only kind of just started it, and we're beginning to see that this can actually completely change the way we see how we construct a curriculum. And I think the beginnings are apparent in the fact that students themselves are offering us what it is that they want to learn and that what they need to learn. And it is very often not what you think they need. And also, it is also very surprising what they can offer. Like if I asked them to actually show me how they would conduct a piece, a score, for instance, and I actually had no idea how it would be effective online. But actually, they found methods, and one of them actually even went as far as doing one of these split screens, so that he was both playing the piano and conducting himself. So this is the sort of thing we need to discover what excites the learners, and then to teach them how they could hone those skills, and then also get better and learn that learning, whatever subject it is we are trying to teach.
Can I pick up on what Sharon's just said? Because I think there's a great point that she's made there, which is that I think often we have very low expectations of our students. And I think what COVID has delivered us kind of unwittingly in some ways is that opportunity that Sharon's speaking to, that opportunity to say to our students, you solve this problem. I'm not going to solve it for you. I don't know how to do this, and you don't know how to do this. Let's both work in the ambiguity of the moment, in the work. We had there's a fantastic researcher called Ron Beghetto, who did a seminar for us at the Create Centre at the University of Sydney. I'm co-director of a centre that focuses on creativity. And if you're interested, please look it up, because we'd love to have more members, and certainly more members from Hong Kong. We do a lot of talks around creativity and learning and transformation. But what he was saying was creativity, and at your institution, you have it in spades, you have it in spades, that creativity is the only way that we can navigate uncertainty. And I think this gives us an opportunity to reimagine uncertainty as an exciting opportunity for our students to really shine, and expect them to step up, expect them to solve these problems, and not depend on kind of the sage on the stage, as it's called, but actually to really speak to the possibility of having a more collaborative endeavor in the learning. And I think that's such an exciting opportunity to change how we do what we do on a daily basis.
I'd just like to jump in there. I do also think that the different types of learners that we have, some are passive and some are active, and then some are you tend to find some students that are passive during face-to-face classroom time, but when you get them online, I found that they're sort of changed. They're a bit more personable and are more approachable, or they feel they are more active, provide more sort of learning from basically assignments or things that we're setting for them. So then they find ways, like everyone else is saying as well, to I don't want to say just use technology, but it's just being a part of it to then create assignments or provide different ways of submitting stuff.
I have a question here about, so how flexible do you think our curriculum currently is in terms of for exploration, for that kind of creativity that some of you mentioned? For example, we have Michael Lee here asked, how do we balance individual autonomy and the course intended learning outcomes?
I can't speak to how flexible your institution is. I imagine it's like most institutions, not as flexible as it could be. But I think I think we've got to look at what we're doing. If we're just chasing outcomes endlessly, why are we doing that? I think we've got to I'm encouraging people to rethink curriculum. I'm not saying don't do the learning outcomes, but look at the learning first and the outcome second. So what is it actually we want our learners to be engaged in and part of, and then think about how the learning outcomes can meet that, I think. So I mean, I know that what I'm talking about is kind of a bit radical, but actually I think there are ways for us to meet the outcomes in ways that we haven't in the past, by using the kind of tools that we have in technology, but being more collaborative, more creative, more critically reflective, and working on our communication skills and bringing all of that together. But that probably doesn't kind of answer the question, but maybe our colleagues inside the institution would have a better idea than I would.
That's Mohit, Sharon.
I'm always the bad girl who, and I would say just throw intended outcomes out of the window, because I think that yes, it can be something in the back of one's mind, but I really think in a way, I think Michael is saying the process in a way is always more important than the actual result. And I think a teacher going into teach a course would always, you know, have the notion of what it is that they can give. Actually, I wouldn't call that learning outcome. Actually, it is what the teacher can impart, and that at the end of this process, whether the teacher feels that he or she has imparted that knowledge in the most effective way. That is how I would frame teaching and learning. And in the process, I think the collaborative spirit between the students and the teacher is very important, especially in the performing arts, in creative arts. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I think I think what you said is really important, especially when it comes to next year when we have our first year students who really have not been on campus. You know, how you would be building that relatedness or that relationships with the students online if we were have to be conducting everything online. That's something that we have to think really carefully about.
I wonder if I can pick up on a question which has come in from John Goodwin. And I think this is related as well. So obviously we're thinking about curriculum and what do we actually teach, but he's asked about the practical experience, the hands-on nature of a lot of theatre craft and what we're actually dealing with in our practice. And again, it's something that people picked up on in their initial talks. But how do we deal with that? How do we actually deal with the hands-on practical elements? and particularly rethinking our teaching and learning online. And then he's gone on to ask, is there a danger that standards are going to drop? I guess there's a fear there there are some very practical things that it's very difficult to manage, and how do we overcome those hurdles, I guess?
I think that is a problem. It's a problem when you have, I mean, set making, for instance, or kind of those very technical, even skills that are unsafe to do kind of in your backyard or in your flat or in your apartment or wherever. That's going to be a problem. Believe it or not, this pandemic will finish one day, and I wonder whether we should be imagining how we can reshape our curriculum so that those elements that require in-studio work, and there's many of them, actually happen at a different time in the course. So they happen when we can be together, when we don't have to socially distance. So there is an issue that standards in those very technical skills will drop, but I think we also need to see the possibility that the things, and this comes back to the curriculum, maybe there are things that we should be doing that are different. Maybe there are things that are more focused to this stage, to this kind of medium, that we should be concentrating on now. So, you know, if you're working in drama, work to camera, or work to, you know, editing together a kind of a video piece might be a more interesting thing to be doing, or kind of music technology or whatever it is. You're the specialist, you'd know better than I would. But I think how we will need to shift things around and push things that require face-to-face to a time when that's going to be more needed. I don't think there's any point trying to do those things in a half-hearted way when we're not actually, we don't have the wherewithal to do it. It's just frustrating for everyone. We might as well focus on what's good in this medium and do that.
I also want to say, I think there is a question in the chat room about how do we, a danger that the standard will drop with more reliance on technology. I don't think that any of us is saying that we want to move towards teaching entirely online and without any face-to-face, live classes, especially in performance and in orchestral playing or conducting and so on. What I found with the class that I taught this semester was basically, it was an excellent way of establishing a foundation of what they need to know and do before they actually face a live orchestra. And I believe that they were more prepared if we had the chance of putting them on the podium after those many weeks. So I don't think we can really move completely away from live teaching. I mean, not probably, definitely can't. So I don't think there is a danger of that either. I don't think that APA would ever consider that, or the music school will ever consider that. And some of the problems, of course, we're facing now when technology is actually not so developed is that, like one-to-one lessons, very often there are problems because the sound quality is just not good enough. So I'm sure that having gone through this period, the whole world has gone through this period, that the technology will also improve and will become more and more refined. But still, we can't just rely solely on that. And I think that is for sure.
I want to bring in this question from actually a student, Amos Wong, a composition student in the academy. So that being said, that will never be completely online. But the students here asked that during the COVID time, they have actually done multiple online concerts and they have engaged more people than physical concerts before COVID. So do you think we should start seeing online platforms just as equally important as traditional stages? And how could our curriculum address this?
I mean, I suppose I'd come back to what I was saying before, which is do the things online that make sense online. There's an old saying that if a teacher can be replaced by a computer, they should be. And I think that, you know, that's the general principle. There are things that work terribly online, and we all know what they are. But if you're going, and I'm sure this doesn't happen at your institution, but if you're going to lecture students for 60 minutes reading off a piece of paper, that should be online. I mean, there's no point making that a live experience. But if your lectures are interactive and exciting and they're using live kind of aspects and it's an experience, well, of course that should be live. But I think to say it's either or doesn't make much sense. It's what works best. And I completely agree with Sharon that there's no suggestion here that we want to make this kind of the way it is forever. That, I mean, you talk to people and what they say is, I just want to go to a concert. I just want to go back to the theatre. And Auslander talks about liveness and that connection, that frissons that you get when you're in a performance space. And I miss that terribly, and I'm sure many of our students do, and many of our performers are kind of really keen to have that again. So I think there is a very much a desire to be back live, but when we can't, when we do go back to a situation, we've got to think about what works online and what doesn't, and do the things that work online and don't bother with the things that don't.
Mohit, I'm aware that you mentioned about students having to change what they're doing and the approaches they're using, perhaps even the technology they're using to be able to fulfill some of the briefs, which I guess connects to this somewhat.
Yeah, I think it's important. It plays in when you're dealing with the creative understanding of something or something that you're learning, and technology does play in a way to sort of help. Sometimes we're not able to use certain softwares, professional softwares that we would when we're at school or at the academy, and then we have to find other means or ways to then continue their learning, but using different platforms for the time being to sort of, I don't want to say make ends meet, but sort of keep the learning going, keep the creativity going, keep them interested, so then it doesn't feel like there's a lull all of a sudden. Yes, they may not be learning the same sort of tools or same key things that are in that professional software or environment, but we're finding different ways and techniques to then facilitate as well. I think facilitation is also a thing during the COVID period is a challenge in itself.
Are you finding that that's starting to change the actual artistic products that students are making because you're changing those tools, you're changing the way that you're approaching it?
I think the ideas in artistic creation, I don't find that to be sort of going down per se. I think the concepts are still there, creativity is still there. They, again, find their own ways to then meet the standard or create a piece of work that will be of par, you know. And so that way we don't reduce the quality anyway. Yeah.
I'll bring in another question about motivation. So, so one of the audience members asked, how can we motivate our students during this uncertain time? Especially, I think a lot of us might feel somewhat paralyzed and maybe just hoping that, you know, pandemic would just go away and everything would just kind of go back to normal. So do you have any practical strategies in terms of how we can motivate our students?
I think a bit more in terms of freedom to express themselves. I personally found if I put too many sort of rules and restrictions in terms of their creation, then that may reduce their ability to be open in developing something that they want to show. Generally, even in face-to-face environment or online, I think the learning should be a little more open and flexible to allow students to step up. And it's not all about the teacher saying, hey, this is how you got to do it, this is the way to do it. I think the students should also be able to come up with some ideas, solutions, and ways they'd like to kind of develop their stories. And open to different sort of technologies that may not be conventional to begin with. And I think a lot of it is, say, smaller exercises or smaller projects in the beginning or introductory level courses. They don't really need to be heavy on the machinery or heavy on the equipment. I'm just speaking from film and television sort of point of view. And if you could shoot something on a smaller scale, like a DSLR or an iPhone for a smaller exercise to get things, for students to start learning a bit about maybe not perfect composition, but just sort of shooting something. And especially when you're looking at the first year BFA students, they're coming in new. A lot of them are not well experienced or come in with sort of an associate degree in this sort of field. So it's good for them to just feel a bit relaxed and not pressured by using sort of a professional gear to, and then a lot of it can be done through online lectures or just information that's provided to them to guide them in a way, and they can go out and produce it, and discussions can be done. We don't need to actually be in a classroom to do it. And things can move a little faster, and I've noticed it's a bit more streamlined when we're not in a 2-hour, 3-hour block of time. We maybe meet for like 25, 30 minutes, and then they go off for an hour or so. They either discuss in their groups, and then we come back and finish it off as a class, or just answer any questions that they may have. And I think more as a facilitator than say, hey, I'm a teacher here, do it this way. I think we need to ease off the reins a bit.
Well, I think the point maybe Mohit is making is basically teach less so that the students can learn more. And we actually started, well, not started, but we had a creative entrepreneur class, luckily in January, when we actually just had that window of 2 or 3 weeks when we could actually teach, see the students face to face. And it was a 2-week intensive course. And it has been very interesting because I found that actually those students through the semester had been more motivated than I had been because in that course, they basically were asked to just do what they find are their own strengths, and to follow the path of what they feel is would bring the best out of themselves. And of course, that is a very, very unusual kind of approach, and it's a completely different kind of course than anything else we're teaching in a way. So the only learning outcome would be to create something that really means something for yourself. And just actually, I can share. Just yesterday, I saw a video made by one of our Chinese music students, a diesel player, and it was so fun. I mean, I can share it with everybody when on a platform that more people can see it. But through this period, you can still see the students their spirits are not dampened. They are still actually doing things that really excite themselves, and I actually feel really, really proud of them that way. And I wish I have the same kind of motivation as they have.
Yeah, I'd kind of broadly agree with Sharon. I suppose my only difference, I wouldn't say teach less, I'd say teach better. So I think teach less transmissively, teach less kind of, stand and deliver, and think about all of the other kind of ways that you can teach. I mean, in the book that's coming out next year, Transforming Education, we've identified 9 different elements of pedagogy, like motivated instruction, deliberate practice, network schemas, reflected experience, collaborative inquiry, creative iteration, goes on and on and on. Well, it goes on to 9. And it seems to me that we're very locked into a way of teaching that we either learnt or that we've done for so many years that we haven't been able to kind of break outside that. And when we work with educators around pedagogy, we often open up these new vistas because people haven't even considered, for instance, how kind of dynamic feedback might work, or discovery scaffolds, or they have understood that they've been doing them, but they haven't understood the mechanics of them. So helping them understand the kind of insides of the pedagogy, the way pedagogy works, can really open it up. So I think you can teach better by being more deliberate in your practice, more thoughtful, and even curatorial in your practice, and opening up all of the possibilities to do different things. And that doesn't matter whether it's online or kind of live or whatever. I think if you think about the technology, about the learning first and the technology second, and I think those kinds of things will actually motivate students to come back to the original point. If you are offering them a really exciting opportunity to do different things in different ways, and you come back to that kind of those 3 ideas of autonomy, connectedness, and relatedness, we know from the research that will motivate our students. Because that research doesn't come out of nowhere. That's research with real students in real classrooms, from kindergarten right through to kind of adult education. So that we know that those are the things that will work. And I think pedagogy is critical, but also kind of creating learning experiences where students are motivated no matter what, using that autonomy, connectedness, autonomy, competence, and relatedness.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. We could almost conclude on that, but I have one final question. We only have like a minute or so to go. And it's just this: if there was a takeaway that you could offer, sort of summing up the conversation we've just had, if there's one thing that you'd encourage somebody to think about further, or to add to their practice, or to think about in terms of their teaching and learning, what would that be? What would be the takeaway possibly from our conversation?
I'll speak first because I don't seem to be able to stop myself. I would say use this opportunity to have a transformative moment in terms of your learning and teaching. Use this moment to focus on how you might do autonomy, relatedness, and competence better. Think about how you can build capabilities in your students. So don't waste a crisis is what I'm saying. Use this to get better at being collaborative, better at kind of relating to your students and better at constructing really exciting learning that uses all of the elements of pedagogy, not just the one or two that you've been using.
Great.
Well, maybe what I will say is I will quote Bruce Lee, be like water. So we have to be adaptable. Basically, we need to be much, much more aware and always conscious of what is required in order to teach better, and how we can teach better, whether it is through technology or otherwise, or how we look at curriculum, how we look at learning outcomes, how we look at the whole process. And I think we can be, because of years of doing certain things in the same way, so stuck in this a habit almost of delivering teaching in a certain way, that I would say thanks to the pandemic, I think finally this is kind of starting to dissolve and break up. And so I would say just keep going in this manner, in this spirit, and don't stop. If the pandemic finishes, and then if we just go back to how we were before, that would actually be quite sad, I would say.
I think it's probably a lot of us, we're going to probably say the same thing. So it's flexibility and sort of integrating this into your process, and I think not being afraid of it. A lot of it is it looks a bit like it's daunting in the first place. But I think it's how you can incorporate these tools to then sort of help you streamline maybe your teaching process or your students' learning process, and open up more space or more time for them, for students. A lot of times they're seeing the schedule as packed for kids from morning to evening, and maybe we can sort of open that up, more free time for students. If a lot of things are online in terms of facilitation, then they can have a little more room to process and think about things. I think that's very important. Right now, they're just cramming everything in, going from electives to major studies. And so there's a lot going on. So I think a lot of it is scheduling things in to then think about the student more than about, say, the teachers, of course.
Okay, thank you so much. So this brings us to the end of our webinar today. I want to thank you again for our three speakers, Mohit, Sharon, and Michael. And I'd like to remind everyone that Michael Anderson has a few recent books that are really relevant to our time now, so check them out. And I also want to thank our team, our Edward team, especially Everett and MK and Edward and Sherry, who have been leading on the technology side of things, and also the broader team at the Academy who have contributed to making this webinar possible.